The case of Gumaro de Dios Arias, known as the Cannibal of Playa del Carmen, is one of the darkest in Mexico's criminal history. His story goes far beyond a simple homicide, as it involves disturbing aspects that left an indelible mark on the collective imagination: cannibalism, mental illness, and unprecedented brutality. Throughout this video, we will explore his life, his childhood, the crimes he committed, and how his mental health played a crucial role in his behavior. We will see how he was captured and what his current life is like behind bars. We will also discuss the impact of his case on Mexican society and how it has been interpreted over time. Before we begin, I invite you to subscribe to our channel The Secret Case, where we cover the most shocking and disturbing true crime cases. If you enjoy this content, activate the bell to receive notifications of each new video we publish. Gumaro's origin is key to understanding how he became the cannibal of Playa del Carmen. He was born in a small rural town in the state of Veracruz, to a family living in extreme poverty. His family environment was dysfunctional, marked by domestic violence and neglect. From an early age, he exhibited strange behavior, but as often happens in marginalized communities, these problems went unnoticed. Gumaro never received a full formal education. He dropped out of school at a very early age, which contributed to his social isolation. In his teenage years, episodes of violence and aggression became more apparent. He began to show a growing disinterest in social norms and life in general. At this stage in his life, young Gumaro began to have psychotic episodes, but it was not until much later that he was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. In addition to violence at home, Gumaro suffered physical and emotional abuse from family members and neighbors, which intensified his erratic behavior and disconnection from reality. Instead of receiving the medical care he needed, he was pushed further to the margins of society, unable to form healthy relationships or lead a productive life. Over time, Gumaro decided to leave his home and began to wander around different parts of the country. It was then that he arrived in Playa del Carmen, a paradise and tourist place, but where he also found an ideal environment to hide his inner demons. The act that would seal his fate occurred in 2004. By then, Gumaro was living on the streets, wandering around Playa del Carmen. It was in this context that he met his victim, a man with whom he shared his precarious situation. After a heated argument fueled by Gumaro's desperation and mental illness, the situation escalated to unimaginable levels. Gumaro brutally attacked this man, beating him to death. What came next was even more macabre. He dismembered the corpse and consumed part of its flesh, an act of cannibalism to which he would later confess. This behavior was not a simple act of extreme violence, but rather the reflection of a deeply disturbed mind that had been left without medical attention for years. Details of the crime came to light when authorities found the mutilated body in a makeshift hiding place on the beach. The community was shocked not only by the brutality of the murder, but also by the fact that an act of cannibalism had occurred in their surroundings. Fear and paranoia gripped Playa del Carmen. Rumors and theories about more victims began to circulate, although they were never proven. This case was one of the most publicized of the time, and Gumaro was nicknamed by the press as the Cannibal of Playa del Carmen. Local police quickly identified Gumaro as the prime suspect, in part because of his erratic behavior and history of violence in the community. After a brief search, he was captured near the crime scene, without putting up any resistance. During his arrest, he showed clear signs of mental illness, which raised alarm bells among officers. Gumaro de Dios Arias' trial was swift, but not without controversy. The defense argued that Gumaro was not responsible for his actions due to his paranoid schizophrenia, and presented psychiatric reports confirming this. However, the brutality of the crime and the cannibalism led the prosecution to ask for an exemplary sentence. Gumaro was eventually found guilty of aggravated homicide and cannibalism. Despite his mental problems, the court ruled that he should serve a long prison sentence. He was sentenced to 20 years in prison, with the possibility of receiving psychiatric care within the prison system. Gumaro's case raised serious questions about how the Mexican justice system treats mentally ill criminals. Was he a ruthless killer or a man abandoned by the health system who needed treatment from an early age? Gumaro de Dios Arias was transferred to a maximum security prison, where he began receiving psychiatric treatment. Medical reports suggest that his condition improved slightly with the use of antipsychotic drugs, although his condition remains serious and requires constant care. In prison, Gumaro has lived in isolation, separated from other inmates due to his dangerousness and the nature of his crime. Despite attempts at rehabilitation, his mental illness remains an obstacle to any attempt to reintegrate him into society. His behavior, although more controlled thanks to medication, remains unpredictable. Gumaro's case has been studied by psychologists and criminologists, who have analyzed it from different perspectives. Some believe that his mental illness was the determining factor in his behavior, while others argue that his violent actions cannot be fully justified by his mental state. The case of Gumaro de Dios Arias had a profound impact on the community of Playa del Carmen. For years, this tourist town had been known for its paradisiacal beaches and relaxed atmosphere. However, Gumaro's brutal crime changed that perception for many. Fear and paranoia gripped the city. Although it was an isolated case, the fact that a man had committed cannibalism in the middle of a tourist area raised fears that Playa del Carmen was no longer a safe place. The media echoed these fears, and for weeks, the case was covered in the headlines of the country's main newspapers and news programs. At the media level, Gumaro's case also raised questions about how the media portrays mentally ill criminals. While some sensationalist programs portrayed him as a remorseless monster, others tried to understand his behavior from a more human perspective, focusing on his psychiatric diagnosis. One of the most important aspects of Gumaro's case is what it reveals about the mental health and justice system in Mexico. Over the years, it has become clear that Mexico faces serious problems in adequately treating people with serious mental disorders. Gumaro de Dios Arias is not an isolated case, and many others have fallen through the cracks, not receiving the medical attention they need, until it is too late. In this sense, Gumaro's case makes us reflect on how this tragedy could have been prevented. If he had received the proper treatment in his youth, perhaps he would not have gone on to commit the terrible crime that made him famous. The Mexican prison system, which in many cases is not prepared to handle criminals with mental disorders, also plays a role in this story. Gumaro is an example of how the lack of resources and mental health care can lead to devastating consequences. How many other cases like his are occurring in the country without receiving the necessary attention? Marginalization and stigma towards mental illness in Mexico make it difficult for people like Gumaro to receive help in time. This case brought into focus the urgency of investing in resources for mental health and reforming a justice system that, in many cases, only punishes without offering rehabilitation. Moreover, the case of Gumaro de Dios Arias highlights a broader problem within Mexican prisons: the lack of adequate resources for psychiatric treatment. Although Gumaro was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia and should theoretically have been treated in a specialized mental institution, he ended up in a regular prison, where care for mentally ill inmates is limited or non-existent. Many mental health experts have stressed that imprisoning people like Gumaro is not a real solution. In his condition, what he needs is permanent treatment, not just punishment. However, the lack of infrastructure and specialized personnel within the Mexican prison system has turned prisons into centers of exclusion, rather than places where people can receive the help they need to rehabilitate themselves. This case, although isolated, represents the situation of thousands of people who suffer from mental disorders in Mexico. Society has an outstanding debt to those who suffer from serious mental illnesses, and cases like Gumaro's should make us reflect on the need for better, more humanitarian and comprehensive care for those who are at risk. Today, Gumaro de Dios Arias is still serving his sentence in a maximum security prison. Even though more than a decade has passed since his arrest, his case remains a topic of conversation among criminologists and mental health experts. He continues to take medication to control his psychotic episodes, but his future is uncertain. No new serious incidents have been reported in prison, although Gumaro is known to live in solitary confinement most of the time. Visits to his cell are limited, and he rarely interacts with other prisoners. According to some reports, his mental condition has shown some degree of stabilization thanks to psychiatric treatment, but he is not expected to be released or reintegrated into society, given the nature of his crime. Although his name no longer appears in the headlines, Gumaro's case remains a reminder of how life circumstances and lack of proper treatment can lead to unimaginable tragedy. Mexican society, in many ways, continues to bear the questions left by this case. Could we have done more to prevent this from happening? And what measures should be taken to prevent something like this from happening again? The case of Gumaro de Dios Arias is a chilling example of how mental illness can become a danger, not only to the person suffering from it, but also to society at large, when not addressed in time. Although his crime was horrific and sparked the outrage of an entire nation, it is important to remember that Gumaro was not born a murderer. His life, marked by violence, abandonment and mental illness, led him down a dark path from which he could not escape. This case also makes us reflect on the responsibility of health institutions and the judicial system in the management of people with serious mental disorders. It is clear that a purely punitive approach is not always the best solution, and that in some cases it is crucial to offer comprehensive care that includes medical treatment, psychological support and, above all, a deeper understanding of the problems these people face. For the Mexican justice system, Gumaro's case should be a wake-up call. There is an urgent need to reform the approach to prisoners with mental illness and to improve prison conditions so that those suffering from these disorders receive adequate treatment. Only in this way can we prevent cases like Gumaro's from happening again in the future. If you have been shocked by this case and are interested in continuing to explore other similar cases, I invite you to subscribe to El Caso Secreto. Don't forget to activate notifications so you don't miss any of our videos. Here we analyze in depth the most shocking crimes and the darkest enigmas of the criminal world.